My family told me to leave and never come back during Christmas dinner, with my child sitting right there. I didn't beg. I just said, "Then you won't mind me doing this." 5 minutes later, they were begging me to undo it. Christmas dinner at Cedar Ridge Lane always looked warmer from the outside. The windows glowed amber against the Oregon cold, lights wrapped around the porch railings in tidy spirals. From the street, it could have passed for a postcard. Tradition intact, family gathered, nothing broken. Inside, the table was set with practiced care. Matching plates, folded napkins, a centerpiece my sister Vivian had adjusted 3 times until it sat perfectly in the middle, like proof that effort could replace honesty. I noticed the quiet first, not the comfortable kind, the kind that settles when everyone is waiting for someone else to speak, and hoping it won't be them. My son Leo, 8 years old, sat beside me with his shoulders tucked in, feet barely touching the floor. He'd taken 2 careful bites of his roll and then stopped. His peas were lined up, counted without meaning to be. When children feel tension, they make patterns. It's their way of staying safe. Across from us, Vivian smiled too brightly, the way she did when she wanted credit for being reasonable. Her husband Mark nodded along, present without ever participating. My mother Audrey dabbed her mouth with a napkin as if we were at a restaurant instead of a family table. My father Samuel stared at his plate, studying it like the answers might rise up if he looked long enough. I tried to keep my breathing even. This year, I'd promised myself, would be different. Not better, just quieter. Less explaining, less bracing. "Leo's grown," Audrey said suddenly, her voice light. "He's so serious." Serious was her word for careful. "He's just tired," I replied. "Long drive." Vivian tilted her head, eyes flicking to Leo's sweater. "It's simple," she said, smiling. "Very practical." I nodded. I always nodded. Leo glanced up at me, searching my face for a cue. I gave him a small smile. He returned to his peas. Dessert plates were cleared. Coffee was poured. The moment stretched thin. Then Vivian set her mug down. "We need to talk," she said. My stomach tightened. Not because I didn't expect it, but because I did. There's a certain tone people use when they've already decided the outcome and are just arranging the words around it. Audrey leaned forward immediately. "It's for the best." Samuel didn't look up. I waited. Vivian folded her hands. "This isn't healthy anymore, Naomi. For anyone." Mark nodded like punctuation. "What isn't?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Vivian exhaled. "The way things are. The tension, the expectations." I almost laughed. Expectations were the only thing I'd ever been good at meeting. Audrey reached in smoothly. "You should leave," she said. "Tonight. And don't come back." The words landed softly. That was what made them cruel. For a second I thought I'd misheard her. Words like that weren't supposed to sound so calm. I looked at Samuel. He lifted his eyes, met mine for half a heartbeat, then dropped them again. Silence, his oldest contribution. Beside me, Leo froze. His fork hovered in midair. A pea rolled toward the edge of his plate and stopped. His small hand tightened, knuckles pale, and I felt something in my chest crack. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly. Like ice giving way under weight. Vivian continued, her voice gentle, rehearsed. "Christmas is stressful enough. This just makes it harder." Harder for whom? She didn't say. I could have begged. I could have explained how the last year had scraped me hollow, how I was still learning how to breathe without my husband Ethan, still figuring out how to hold space for grief without letting it swallow my son. I could have reminded them of all the times I'd shown up when it was easier not to. Instead, I set my fork down. The sound was sharper than I expected. "Okay," I said. Vivian blinked. "Okay?" I stood. "Leo," I said gently, keeping my eyes on him. "Can you grab your jacket and your backpack?" He didn't ask why. He slid out of his chair like he'd been waiting for permission. That hurt more than the words had. It meant he'd learned this moment before I had. "Okay," he said softly and walked toward the hallway. As soon as he disappeared, the room changed. Vivian crossed her arms. Good. Audrey exhaled, relief flickering across her face. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I smiled. Not the polite smile I'd worn my whole life. This one felt different, steady, clear. Then you won't mind me doing this, I said. Mark frowned. Doing what? I didn't answer. I walked out of the dining room, past the living room tree glowing with ornaments that had survived generations, and into the kitchen. I went straight to the cupboard at the end of the counter and opened it. Behind the serving platters sat 3 envelopes. Plain, heavy. Each one had a name written carefully across the front. I took them out and laid them on the counter. Behind me, footsteps approached. Audrey laughed, short and sharp. What is this supposed to be? Samuel finally spoke. Naomi, if you're trying to… This isn't guilt, I said, turning back to them. It's consequences. Vivian scoffed. You think we need whatever that is? I picked up the first envelope and tore it in half. The sound sliced through the kitchen. Audrey gasped. I tore the second, slowly. Samuel's jaw tightened. The third one I didn't hesitate with. 3 neat piles of paper hit the counter. In the silence that followed, something shifted. They still didn't understand, but they would. 5 minutes was all it would take. For a moment after the last envelope fell apart on the counter, the room didn't react. Not shock, calculation. Vivian was the first to speak. She let out a thin laugh, the kind meant to reassert control. Okay, that's dramatic. Mark nodded, grateful for the cue. You're making a scene. Audrey's eyes darted between the torn paper and my face. Naomi, you're upset. Let's all calm down. Samuel said nothing. He rarely did when it mattered. I gathered the pieces into 3 tidy piles, aligning the edges like I was finishing a task. When I turned away from the counter, Vivian rolled her eyes. You think ripping up papers is going to scare us? She asked. I met her gaze. No. I walked back toward the hallway. Leo's jacket is by the door. Audrey called after me, suddenly helpful. Just so you know, the living room felt louder than before. The tree hummed with lights. Wrapped gifts waited beneath it, some with Leo's name written in careful script. I wondered how long they would have stayed unopened if I hadn't stood up. Leo was already pulling on his coat when I reached him. His backpack hung from one shoulder, the zipper half caught. His fingers worked at it too quickly. Hey, I said softly, kneeling. I've got it. He stilled and let me help. His eyes were wide but dry. That scared me more than tears. Did I do something wrong? He asked. No, I said immediately. You didn't do anything wrong. He nodded like he was filing that answer away to test later. Behind us, footsteps approached. Audrey's voice softened into something she probably thought sounded kind. This isn't about Leo. This is about you. I stood and turned to face her. You said Christmas was better without me, I replied. With my child sitting right there. Vivian waved a hand. You're taking it personally. That's because it was personal. Samuel cleared his throat. Your mother didn't mean it like that. I looked at him. How did she mean it? He didn't answer. Leo shifted closer, his shoulder brushing my hip. I wrapped an arm around him, feeling how small he still was, how much weight he'd been carrying quietly. Vivian sighed. We were trying to set boundaries. I almost smiled. Boundaries don't involve humiliation, I said. They don't involve telling a child he doesn't belong. Mark scoffed. You're twisting this. No, I said. I'm finally hearing it. The front door stood a few steps away. Audrey's tone changed, less sharp, more anxious. Where are you going to go? That question revealed more than she intended. As if leaving their house meant vanishing entirely. I'll figure it out, I said. Samuel took a step toward the door, not blocking it, just existing in the space like he always did when he wanted credit for restraint. You don't have to burn everything down. I met his eyes. I didn't. I walked away from what was already on fire. For a heartbeat, I thought he might say something else. Something honest. Something late but real. He stepped aside. I opened the door. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. Leo inhaled, then squared his shoulders like he was preparing himself for something new. As we stepped onto the porch, voices followed us. Naomi, wait. Let's talk about this. I didn't turn around. We moved down the steps together, each creak loud in the quiet. The driveway stretched ahead, dark and still, my car waiting at the end like a promise I hadn't known I'd made. When we reached it, Leo looked up at me. "Mom?" "Yes. Are we in trouble?" I opened his door and helped him inside, buckled his seatbelt, made sure he was warm. "No," I said, and meant it. "We're leaving it." I closed the door and walked around to the driver's side. Behind me, I could feel them watching, confused now, unsettled. They still thought this was a performance, that I would circle back, that I always did. I paused with my hand on the handle. "Some moments change everything," I said quietly. Not to them, not even to Leo, more to the night itself. If you stay long enough to see them. They didn't understand. Not yet. I got into the car and closed the door. The sound was solid. Final. As I started the engine, the house on Cedar Ridge Lane glowed behind us, lights blinking in patient rhythms, like nothing had gone wrong at all. Leo leaned back in his seat and let out a breath he'd been holding. I reached over and squeezed his hand, and for the first time that night, the silence felt like relief. The engine hadn't even warmed up yet. I could hear it, the low, uneven hum, while I adjusted the mirrors with hands that felt steadier than they had any right to be. Leo sat quietly in the back seat, his backpack hugged to his chest like an anchor. The dashboard clock glowed 6:47 p.m. 5 minutes ago, they had been certain. 5 minutes ago, they had been comfortable. I put the car in reverse. That was when the front door flew open. "Naomi!" Audrey's voice cracked through the cold air, sharp and sudden. I glanced up in the rearview mirror just in time to see her step onto the porch without a coat, one hand clutching the doorframe like the house itself might pull away from her. Behind her, Vivian appeared, heels clicking too fast against the wood. Mark followed, already talking, already gesturing, as if volume might rewind time. Samuel came last, slower than the rest, his face pale in the glow of the porch light. I stopped the car, not because I owed them anything, because Leo shifted in his seat, startled. I turned around. "You okay?" He nodded, but his fingers tightened around the straps of his backpack. I stepped out of the car and closed the door behind me. The cold bit immediately. Oregon winter didn't announce itself. It crept under your clothes and stayed there. I wrapped my arms around myself, not from the cold, but from the sudden weight of being seen again. Audrey hurried down the steps, her breath coming fast. "Naomi, wait, please." Vivian followed, her earlier composure cracking around the edges. "You don't have to do this." Mark laughed once, too loudly. "This has gone far enough." Samuel stopped at the bottom step, hands shoved deep into his pockets, eyes fixed on the driveway like it might give him instructions. I didn't speak. Audrey reached for my arm, then hesitated, her hand hovering inches away. "Is Leo okay?" That question, asked now, hit harder than anything else. "He's with me," I said. "That's what matters." Vivian frowned. "You misunderstood what Mom said." "No," I replied. "I heard it." "That was emotional," Mark said quickly. "You know how holidays get." I looked at him then. Really looked. At the man who had watched the entire dinner like it was someone else's problem. "It was after dessert," I said. "That wasn't emotion, that was a decision." Audrey's voice wavered. "You didn't have to destroy everything." I tilted my head. "You told me to leave and never come back." "That's not what we meant," Vivian snapped. "Then what did you mean?" I asked. Silence. Leo's face appeared in the side mirror. He was watching everything, eyes wide, absorbing far more than he should have had to. That changed something in me. "This conversation is over," I said. Vivian took a step forward. "You can't just tear something up and walk away." I almost smiled. "You already walked away. I just stopped following." Mark scoffed. "You think you've won something." I shook my head. "This isn't winning." Audrey's tears spilled over then, real and messy. "Please, just undo it. We can pretend none of this happened." I looked at her and felt something settle. Heavy. Final. Calm. "That's what you've always wanted," I said quietly. "Pretend." Samuel finally spoke. His voice was low, strained. Naomi, let's talk inside. I met his eyes. You had your chance, I said. You stayed silent. That landed. For the first time all night, he didn't look away. Behind me, the car door opened slightly. Mom? Leo's voice was small, careful. I turned. Yes, sweetheart. Can we go now? I didn't hesitate. Yes. I walked back to the car, every step measured. Audrey called my name again, louder this time. Vivian said something sharp I didn't catch. Mark's voice overlapped with hers. Samuel said nothing. I got into the driver's seat and shut the door. The sound was clean, solid. As I started the engine, Audrey ran forward, her hands shaking. Naomi, please! I put the car in drive. Through the windshield, I saw their faces change. Confusion melting into panic, panic tightening into something close to fear. 5 minutes ago, they had believed they were in control. Now they were begging for a rewrite. I didn't look back again. The car rolled forward, tires crunching softly against the driveway. The house on Cedar Ridge Lane shrank behind us, lights blinking in patient rhythms, as if nothing inside had just broken. Leo exhaled slowly. I reached back and squeezed his knee. You did great, he nodded. I'm glad we left. So was I. Some moments don't announce themselves as turning points. They just happen, and by the time you realize what's changed, there's no going back. Only forward, into a quiet that finally belongs to you. The road away from Cedar Ridge Lane curved gently through dark trees, their branches bare and thin against the night sky. I drove without speaking, letting the quiet settle the way snow does, slow, inevitable, softening everything it touches. Leo rested his forehead against the window, watching lights blur past. His breathing evened out as the distance grew. Children adapt quickly when danger fades. Adults are the ones who keep replaying the threat. I realized then that what had just happened wasn't sudden at all. It was practiced. Not rehearsed with words, but with years. Vivian, had always been the center of gravity in that house. Even as kids, it was clear. When she wanted something, the room adjusted itself. Chairs scraped, voices lowered, plans shifted. I learned early that my job was to make things easier, smoother, quieter. I was the extra plate they kept just in case. Growing up, Vivian was praised for her confidence. I was praised for my patience. She was outspoken. I was understanding. She cried, and my mother rushed in like the world was ending. I cried, and my father said, "Don't start." So I didn't. I learned to swallow words before they formed. I learned to read a room before I entered it. I learned how to make myself useful enough to justify my presence without ever demanding space. Those lessons followed me into adulthood. When I met Ethan, he noticed it immediately. You disappear when people interrupt you, he said once, gently, like an observation, not an accusation. I laughed it off. Everyone interrupted everyone. That was normal. It's not, he replied. Not when it happens every time. Ethan had a way of saying things plainly, without drama. He fixed problems the same way, quietly, methodically, without needing applause. He worked long hours, came home tired and kind, the kind of man who made space without making noise. When Leo was born, Ethan cried harder than I did. He held our son like something holy, like he was afraid the world might rush in too soon. For a while, life felt stable. Not perfect, but balanced. And because old habits don't vanish just because circumstances change, we helped my parents. A little money every month. Not because they asked directly, but because the expectation hung in the air like humidity. Ethan never complained. He just squeezed my hand under the table when the subject came up, grounding me. They never thanked us. They accepted it like gravity. When Ethan died, the world split open in a way I didn't know how to explain to anyone who hadn't felt it. A routine inspection. A failure that shouldn't have happened. They called it an accident first. Later, they called it preventable. The phone call came on a Tuesday. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets, staring at the wall like it might rearrange itself into a different reality if I looked long enough. Leo was 6. Grief didn't pause responsibilities. Lunches still had to be packed. Homework still needed checking. Bills still arrived on time, indifferent to loss. The money we'd been sending my parents stopped immediately, not out of spite, but necessity. I barely noticed the absence. They did. My mother called more often, not to ask how I was sleeping or whether Leo was eating, to ask if everything was manageable. Vivian offered advice. Financial tips delivered with the confidence of someone who had never had to choose between groceries and gas. When I asked for help once, just once, my mother sent a small amount and then posted about it online. A carefully worded message about stepping up for family, paired with a sad emoji and a smiling photo. I didn't correct the narrative. Silence was familiar. The settlement from Ethan's death took months. Paperwork, lawyers, waiting. I hired someone to handle it because grief and bureaucracy don't coexist peacefully. When the money finally came through, 2 weeks before Christmas, I stared at the number like it belonged to someone else. It didn't feel like relief. It felt like responsibility. My first thought wasn't escape, it was help. I thought, naively, that generosity could finally buy safety. That if I showed up with something undeniable, they'd stop seeing me as a burden and start seeing me as family. So I prepared the envelopes. 3 names, one last attempt. As I drove that night with Leo humming softly in the back seat, I told myself this would be a turning point. That things would finally change. I was right. I just hadn't realized the change wouldn't happen in their house. It would happen in the car, on a dark road, with my child finally breathing freely behind me. And once I understood that, there was no going back. I didn't plan the hotel. That part mattered to me later, when I tried to understand how instinct works when reason is exhausted. I didn't search for the cheapest option or the closest one. I just followed the road until the lights thinned and Leo's voice softened into quiet. "Mom?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "I'm here," I said. "Are we going home?" The question wasn't about geography. It never was. "Not tonight," I replied. "We're going somewhere safe." That word, safe, settled him in a way explanations never could. The hotel sat off Route 18, low and unassuming, its sign flickering like it had been repaired one too many times. Inside, the lobby smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. The heater hummed. The woman at the front desk smiled at Leo first, then at me, and didn't ask any questions that required lies. 2 beds, clean sheets, a bathroom that locked. Leo kicked off his shoes and climbed onto the bed nearest the window like he'd claimed territory. He bounced once, then stopped, as if checking whether joy was allowed. "It's okay," I said. "You can jump." He smiled, small, careful, and bounced again. I sat on the edge of the other bed and let my shoulders drop for the first time that night. The silence here was different. It didn't press. It held. We shared a vending machine dinner. Pretzels, juice, something sweet I usually wouldn't allow so late. Rules soften when fear recedes. Leo ate quietly, glancing at me between bites. "Did they mean it?" he asked finally. I didn't pretend not to understand. "Yes," I said. "They did." He nodded, absorbing it. Then, after a pause, "Did you?" The question surprised me, not because it was unexpected, but because it was fair. "I meant what I said," I answered, "but not the way they meant it." He considered that. "So we're not going back?" "Not tonight," I said again. "Maybe not ever." His mouth tightened, not in sadness, but in thought. Children don't grieve the way adults expect. They reorganize. "Okay," he said. "Can we watch a movie?" "Yes," I said. "Pick anything." We found something loud and bright and utterly unrealistic. Leo laughed at the wrong parts. I laughed because he did. The sound felt strange in my throat, like a muscle I hadn't used in a while. When the movie ended, he curled under the blanket and yawned. I brushed his hair back and kissed his forehead. "You didn't do anything wrong," I told him. "I know," he said, already half asleep. I wasn't sure when he'd learned to say that. After he fell asleep, Sprawled sideways like he owned the bed, my phone lit up on the nightstand. Missed calls, messages stacking like they always had. Where are you? This has gone too far. You need to fix this. I didn't answer. I stared at the ceiling instead, listening to the hum of the heater, the distant sound of cars passing without noticing us at all. For years, I'd measured safety by proximity, how close I was to the people who were supposed to protect me. Now, distance felt like the point. I thought about the envelopes, torn and scattered on a kitchen counter I would never clean again. About how quickly certainty had turned to panic. About how 5 minutes could undo decades of assumptions. And then I thought about something else. About how often I'd mistaken endurance for strength. About how many times I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace, not realizing the peace had never included me. The phone buzzed again. I turned it face down. Tomorrow would bring explanations I didn't owe and questions I didn't need to answer. Tomorrow would ask me to be reasonable, forgiving, understanding, things I had been my entire life. Tonight I chose rest. I lay down fully clothed on the bed, one hand resting on the space between us where Leo's blanket rose and fell. His breathing was slow and even, untroubled by the weight I'd carried for years. In that room, with its flickering sign and borrowed warmth, I understood something that hadn't been clear before. Leaving didn't make me reckless. It made me honest. And honesty, for the first time in a long while, felt like home. Morning came quietly, no alarms, no raised voices from the next room. Just the soft hum of traffic outside and a thin strip of winter light creeping through the gap in the curtains. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was, and the not knowing felt like relief. Then I remembered, not with a jolt, but with clarity. Leo was still asleep, one arm flung over the pillow, hair flattened on one side of his head. I watched his chest rise and fall and realized how rare it was to see him sleep that deeply. How often he used to wake in the middle of the night at my parents' house, whispering that he couldn't rest, that the walls felt too loud. I slipped out of bed and made coffee with the little machine by the window. It tasted weak and burnt and perfect. My phone lay face down on the nightstand. I didn't touch it. When Leo finally stirred, he sat up and blinked around the room, orienting himself. For a brief moment, I saw uncertainty cross his face. Then it disappeared. "We're still here," he said. "Yes," I replied. "We are." He nodded, satisfied. "We checked out before noon. The clerk wished us a good day without curiosity, without judgment." I liked that. Some kindness doesn't need context. The drive back to our apartment felt longer than usual, like the city had stretched overnight. Leo talked about school, about a classmate who cheated at math, about how he wanted pancakes for dinner even though it wasn't Saturday. Life insisting on itself. When we got home, the apartment looked exactly the same as we'd left it. Shoes by the door, dishes in the sink, a stack of mail waiting on the counter. Nothing had collapsed in our absence. Nothing had punished us for leaving. That surprised me more than it should have. Leo dropped his backpack and went straight to his room. I heard drawers opening, toys being shifted, the low hum of him settling back into familiar space. I stood in the kitchen, hands braced on the counter, and let the quiet stretch. Then I picked up my phone. Missed calls, voicemails, texts layered on top of each other. My mother's name, Vivian's, Mark's, numbers I didn't recognize. Extended family, no doubt, already recruited. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I didn't open the messages. Instead, I deleted them all. Not angrily, methodically, one by one, until the screen was clean again. The silence that followed felt different from the night before. Less raw, more intentional. That afternoon, I did laundry. Normal things. Necessary things. The kind of tasks that remind you the world doesn't revolve around one table, one house, one set of voices. As I folded Leo's clothes, I found the sweater he'd worn to dinner. The one Vivian had called simple. I held it for a moment, then folded it carefully and put it away. Nothing was wrong with it. Nothing had ever been wrong with us. In the early evening, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Vivian. "You've humiliated us. Mom is devastated. I don't know who you think you are now, but you've gone too far." I stared at the words, waiting for the familiar tightening in my chest. The urge to explain, to soften, to fix. It didn't come. I typed one sentence. "You told me to leave and never come back in front of my child. I believed you." Then I blocked the number. The finality of it surprised me, not because it was harsh, but because it was calm, like closing a book I'd finished reading. Leo came into the kitchen while I was cooking, dragging a chair over to help. He cracked eggs with exaggerated care, concentrating hard. "Are they still mad?" he asked. "Probably," I said. "Are you?" he asked. I thought about it. About anger and how it usually burned hot and then hollowed me out. "No," I said. "I'm just clear." He smiled at that, like it made sense. After dinner, he did his homework at the table while I washed dishes. At one point, he looked up and said, "I like it when it's just us." I turned off the faucet and met his eyes. "Me too," I said. That night, after he went to bed, I sat on the couch and let myself feel what I'd postponed. Grief, mostly. Not for my parents, not for Vivian, for the version of myself who kept hoping. I didn't judge her. She'd done the best she could with what she knew, but I didn't need to carry her habits forward. Some lessons are learned slowly. Others arrive all at once, undeniable. The morning after didn't bring answers. It brought permission. And that, I was learning, was enough to change everything. The post went up on a Wednesday afternoon. I didn't see it right away. I was at work, half focused on emails, half listening to a coworker talk about weekend plans, when my phone began vibrating in a way that felt off. Not one call, not two. A steady pulse, like something trying to break through. By the time I checked it, there were 3 missed calls and a message from a number I hadn't saved. "Have you seen what Vivian posted?" My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with recognition. This was the part of the pattern I knew well. When control slipped, the narrative followed. I opened social media. Vivian's post sat at the top of my feed, already gathering comments like gravity. A photo of her, Mark, and my parents in the living room at Cedar Ridge Lane. The Christmas tree still stood behind them, lights glowing, gifts untouched beneath it. My mother held a mug with both hands, expression carefully sad. My father stood slightly to the side, half in frame, like plausible deniability. The caption was long. Of course it was. It opened with family. How hard it was. How painful it could be. How sometimes you had to set boundaries with people who refused to take responsibility. She didn't use my name at first. She never did when she wanted to sound generous. Then she did. "Naomi showed up at Christmas expecting sympathy," she wrote. "When we finally said no, she lashed out and humiliated our parents." My hands were cold. I scrolled. "Some people will take everything and still demand more. We're heartbroken, but standing firm." Then the line that made my chest go tight. And yes, before anyone asks, Naomi received a large payout after Ethan's accident and still refused to help her own family. There it was. Not just a lie, but a framing. That I had profited. That I owed. That grief was a resource I'd mismanaged. The comments came fast. "Praying for your parents. Some people don't know how lucky they are. Family is everything." I locked my phone and sat very still. The old version of me would have panicked, scrambled for the right words, the right tone, the right amount of explanation to make myself palatable again. She would have typed and deleted and rewritten until the truth sounded small enough not to offend anyone. I didn't do that. I finished my workday, picked Leo up from school, listened to him talk about a science project involving baking soda and vinegar, made dinner. Only after he went to his room did I open my laptop again. I logged into my bank account, scrolled back. Month after month, year after year. Transfers labeled simply, consistently. Small amounts, regular, quiet. I took screenshots. Then I scrolled further back to a memory I hadn't revisited in a long time. My mother's post from after Ethan died. The one where she talked about stepping up for me. The one where she accepted praise for a single gesture while ignoring years of quiet help. I screenshot that too. I didn't rush. I didn't write defensively. I wrote plainly. "This is the truth," I typed. On Christmas, I was told to leave and never come back, with my child sitting at the table. I didn't storm out. I left because I was told to. I attached the screenshots. Here's what family looked like before Ethan died. We supported my parents every month for years. Quietly, without posting about it. Another image. Here's what happened the one time I asked for help. I paused, then added one last line. Some stories sound different when all of them are told. I hit post. Then I closed my laptop. Upstairs, Leo laughed at something in his room. Unfiltered, unself-conscious. The sound traveled down the hallway and settled somewhere deep in my chest. Within an hour, the tone online shifted. Questions appeared, then doubt, then silence. Vivian's replies grew defensive, shorter, sharper. Then the post disappeared. My phone buzzed. Messages from relatives who hadn't spoken to me in years. Some apologetic, some quiet, some suddenly unsure. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, because the truth no longer needed help standing. That night, as I turned off the lights, I thought about how stories change once you stop interrupting them with fear. How sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth once, and then let people sit with it. If you're still reading, still following this moment by moment, maybe you understand that shift. The point where you stop arguing with a version of yourself that no longer fits. Some chapters don't end with reconciliation. They end with clarity. And clarity, I was learning, travels faster than lies ever could. They came on a Sunday afternoon. I knew it before I opened the door. Not because I'd been expecting them, but because my body reacted first. Shoulders tightening, breath going shallow, the old instinct to prepare myself. Awareness arrived a second later, calm and unworried. Leo was on the living room floor, building something elaborate out of mismatched blocks. He looked up when the doorbell rang. "Mom? I've got it," I said. Through the peephole, I saw them lined up in a way that felt deliberate. Audrey stood closest, holding a bakery box tied with string. Vivian was beside her, posture straight, chin lifted, the way she stood when she wanted to appear reasonable. Mark hovered just behind them, hands in his pockets, scanning the hallway like he didn't want to be there but also didn't want to miss anything. Samuel stood slightly apart, eyes fixed on the floor. They looked smaller outside my door. I opened it just enough to step into the frame. "Naomi?" Audrey said quickly, relief flashing across her face like she'd been afraid I wouldn't answer at all. "We just want to talk." Leo appeared behind me, peeking around my leg. His hand slipped into mine without thinking. Audrey's face softened instantly. "Leo, sweetheart." He didn't move. Vivian cleared her throat. "We've all had time to cool down," she said. "No need to let this spiral." I nodded once. "You shouldn't have come here." Mark frowned. "That's not fair." I almost smiled. "What's not fair," I said calmly, "is telling a child he doesn't belong and then showing up like nothing happened." Audrey lifted the bakery box slightly. "We brought cake." The silence stretched. Samuel finally looked up. "We're family." There it was again. The word they used when they wanted access. Leo's grip on my hand tightened. "No," I said. "You're relatives. Family doesn't make you feel unsafe." Vivian's composure cracked for half a second. "You're being dramatic." I looked at her. "You taught me what that word means." She flushed. "You don't get to punish us forever." I met her gaze, steady. "This isn't punishment. This is a boundary." Audrey's voice trembled. "We didn't mean what we said." "You meant it enough to say it," I replied, in front of my child. Samuel stepped forward, just a little. "You're tearing us apart." I shook my head. "You were already broken. I just stopped holding the pieces." Leo spoke then, his voice quiet but clear. "Mom," he said, "can we close the door?" Something in Audrey's face collapsed. I knelt slightly so Leo could see my face. "Are you okay?" He nodded. "I don't like it when they look at me like that." That was it. I stood and faced them again. "You don't get to come into my home," I said. "You don't get access to my child. Not after what you showed us. Vivian opened her mouth, then closed it. Mark shifted his weight. Audrey's tears spilled, real and messy this time. Samuel didn't say anything. He never did. I wish things were different, Audrey whispered. So do I said honestly. But wishing doesn't make things safe. I stepped back and closed the door. I locked it. The sound was solid, final. For a moment, no one spoke on either side. Then I heard muffled voices. Confusion, frustration, a hint of anger. Footsteps moved away. The hallway went quiet again. Leo looked up at me. Are they gone? Yes, I said. He exhaled. Good. That night, I made dinner while Leo told me about his block tower, how the middle part had to be stronger or the whole thing would fall. He explained it carefully, seriously. I listened. Later, after he went to bed, I sat alone on the couch and let the quiet wrap around me. Not the old quiet, the one that asked me to endure. This one felt chosen. I thought about how many times I'd let people back in because they knocked louder, cried harder, or used words like family as leverage. I wouldn't do that again, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood something simple and unmovable. Love that requires you to feel small isn't love. And protection doesn't need permission. The door stayed closed, and for the first time, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like peace. I didn't hear about them right away. That was the point. Distance works quietly. It doesn't announce results. It just removes you from the center of a system and lets gravity do the rest. The first thing I heard came from a neighbor of my parents, someone who used to smile politely at me during holidays and never remember Leo's name. She ran into me at the grocery store weeks later, eyes wide with curiosity disguised as concern. I heard your parents are selling the house, she said. Such a shame. That place has been in the family forever. I nodded. Things change. She hesitated, clearly wanting more. I didn't give it to her. Bits and pieces filtered in after that. Always secondhand. Always through people who thought they were bringing me news, not realizing they were bringing me closure. Audrey was struggling, they said. Stress. Sleepless nights. She told anyone who would listen that she didn't understand how things had gone so wrong, how she'd lost her daughter without warning. Vivian was angry. Not quietly angry. Sharp, restless, directionless. Without me absorbing tension, it ricocheted. Mark worked longer hours. Arguments spilled into public places where people pretended not to notice. Samuel withdrew completely. Retired early. Spoke less than he already had. Silence, it turned out, didn't hold a family together once there was no one left to translate it. What struck me most wasn't the collapse itself. It was how quickly it happened. I'd spent years believing I was the problem. Too sensitive, too much, too demanding. But the moment I stepped out of the role they'd assigned me, the structure didn't wobble. It failed. Leo noticed changes too, though I never told him details. He noticed that we didn't rush anymore, that mornings were slower, that weekends didn't come with dread disguised as obligation. He stopped asking whether we had to go somewhere he didn't want to be. One evening, while we were eating dinner, he looked up at me and said, "They don't call anymore." "No," I said. "Is that good or bad?" I considered it. "It's quiet." He nodded, satisfied with that answer. Later that night, after he'd gone to bed, I sat alone and thought about how much emotional labor I'd been doing without realizing it. How many conversations I'd mediated. How many feelings I'd carried that weren't mine. I'd been the glue, and glue, once removed, leaves everything exactly as it is. I checked my phone before sleeping. No missed calls, no messages, no emergencies disguised as guilt. Just nothing. That was when it hit me. Not as triumph, not as vindication, but as something steadier. They didn't miss me. They missed the function I served. I turned off the light and lay there in the dark, feeling that truth settle without sharp edges. It didn't hurt the way it once would have. It clarified. Some people call that loneliness. I called it freedom. The next morning, Leo climbed into bed beside me with a book and began reading out loud, mispronouncing half the words. Sunlight streamed in through the window, catching dust motes in the air. Life moved forward, unconcerned with who was no longer watching. And for the first time, I didn't feel responsible for what fell apart behind me. I felt responsible only for what stayed. A year passed. Not the kind that erases things, but the kind that rearranges them. By spring, the settlement was finalized. The number still felt abstract when I looked at it, like it belonged to someone else's life. Money doesn't soften grief. It doesn't replace a voice or a presence. What it does, quietly, almost invisibly, is remove fear. I paid off what needed paying. I chose stability over spectacle. A small house near Willow Park, with trees that dropped leaves on schedule and neighbors who waved without questions. Nothing impressive, nothing that would attract commentary. Leo chose his room immediately. "This one," he said, pointing to the one with the window that caught the afternoon sun. "It feels happy." I believed him. We moved in with boxes that smelled like cardboard and possibility. He taped drawings to the wall. I learned the sound of the place at night, how it settled, how it breathed. For the first time in years, my shoulders dropped without permission. I set aside money for Leo's future. College, emergencies, the kinds of cushions that mean he would never have to stay where he wasn't wanted just to survive. I didn't give my parents anything. I didn't negotiate. I didn't explain. What surprised me most was the absence of guilt. I'd expected it to arrive late, creep in during quiet moments, whisper that I'd gone too far. It never did. What would have haunted me wasn't keeping the money. It would have been teaching my child that cruelty deserves reward. Leo changed in ways no chart could measure. He laughed louder. He took up space on couches and in conversations. He stopped flinching when doors closed too hard. He spoke without checking my face first. He slept through the night. That was how I knew I'd chosen correctly. Sometimes he asked about Ethan. Not directly. Sideways questions about tools, or buildings, or how things were made to last. I answered honestly. We grieved without panic, without rush. We were sad. But we were safe. I heard things through people who thought I'd want updates. That my parents sold the house. That Vivian blamed everyone. That the closeness they'd almost had, the relief they'd almost known, was what hurt them most. I listened without comment. What they lost wasn't me. It was control. One evening, Leo and I sat on the front steps watching fireflies flicker in the yard. He leaned against my arm, warm and steady. "Mom?" he asked. "Yes? Do you think people change?" I thought about it. About effort. About accountability. About how wanting forgiveness isn't the same as wanting to be different. "Some do," I said, "but only if they choose to." He nodded and went back to watching the lights. Later, after he fell asleep, I stood in the doorway of his room and watched his chest rise and fall. Peace doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives quietly, and then it stays. I used to believe love was something you earned by being smaller, quieter, more useful. I don't believe that anymore. Love is what remains when you stop performing. If you've stayed with this story all the way here, maybe it's because you recognize the moment when a door closes, not out of anger, but clarity. The moment you choose safety over approval, truth over tradition, your child or your future self over people who only show up when there's something to take. Some endings don't need revenge. They need resolve. I didn't go too far. I went far enough. And if this choice echoes for you, if you felt it settle instead of sting, then maybe you're choosing something too.